Hi, this is John Massey with Actifio. We're going to take a look at how Actifio can be used within a continuous integration environment. Now we have a demonstration set up, and first we want to take a look at some of the tools that we'll be using within our environment and what the flow of the demonstration will be. At the center of the continuous integration environment we'll be looking at today will be Jenkins. Jenkins will be speaking back over to our source code management tool, GitHub, that holds an online repository of our source code. Jenkins will also be speaking back over to Maven, which is our build automation tool. And of course, Jenkins will be speaking over to Actifio, which we'll be using for test data management. Now, for the flow of today's demonstration, the first thing that will happen is a code commit will complete. We'll make a modification to the source code that's being held online with GitHub. And Jenkins has two ways to kick off the build process based on this code commit. We can either pull the GitHub. This way, if we have any kind of source code commits that have happened, it'll automatically trigger a build process, or we can run an on-demand ad hoc build. For today's demonstration, we'll make a change to the source code, and then we'll run through an on-demand build process. Now, once we've detected the new code commit, we'll take the source code and pass this off to Maven. Maven will view a POM XML file that defines for us the build process. This includes caching of any kind of dependencies the application needs or running through any basic testing. Once Maven's completed the build process, Jenkins will receive those build artifacts. Now that the build's complete, we run through our post-build process. It's actually getting our application online. The first thing we're going to want to do is speak back over to Actifio to provision the latest and greatest test data that we have for our web application to talk to. So this begins with Jenkins making calls back over to Actifio to deliver that data. Now, since we've already had several successful builds before this demonstration, we'll already have some test data provisioned to our Oracle server. As part of this process, Actifio is going to go through and do a cleanup and also get for us the latest and greatest data from our production environment. So we'll take our Oracle system that we're using to speak over to the web application in our development environment. We'll destage those existing databases. We'll snapshot the production environment, passing along some of the build parameters from GitHub and Jenkins. This way we label the snapshot along with the build process that we're completing right now. Once the snapshot completes, we provision over a virtual database to the Oracle systems. Now that we have the test data in place, Jenkins continues with the post-build process. It takes the WAR file from our web application and reaches back over to a running Apache Tomcat server. It'll deploy the application and bring it online for us. Now that we have our application online and we have our test data connected, we have our entire development environment staged up. At this point, we can run through any kind of integration testing or other testing that we want to do within the system, and then we can repeat the entire build process again once our next code commit completes. So let me log into my system over here, and I'm going to bring up the Jenkins dashboard for us. We'll take a look at a project that I already have configured. So right now I have a project that's been created here called Act-Int Test Build. Basically links up for us a web application that we have, and we'll run through an automated build process for us from compiling the code, running some basic tests with Maven, then going through and provisioning over some test data from Actifio for the web app, and then finally deploying that web application to a Tomcat server. So I'm going to look at the configuration that I currently have set up here and just walk through all the pieces. So this is a GitHub project, so I've got the URL linking back over to the project right here. This way Jenkins can go through and track all my changes. And from a source code management perspective, again, I'm using a Git repository. So I've got the repository right here. And for my build triggers for this particular project, I'm pulling back to GitHub for any kind of changes. And I'm going through and I'm doing that every 15 minutes here. Now for the build itself, I've pointed Jenkins over towards the root POM file, so Maven can go through and identify this and begin the build process. And I've also introduced a couple of post steps here. So I have one that's being configured where if the build process succeeds, I have my Oracle server introduced back into Jenkins for me to be able to run through and use the Actifio RESTful interface to kick off a couple of scripts that I have to grab and refresh my data set based on a source Oracle database, go through and clean up from my previous Jenkins build, and then provision over my latest and greatest Oracle database for use by the web app. So just to kind of walk through exactly how that's configured over here, the first piece that I have set up is actually this process for going through and fetching from my database name right here, small db, sitting on my Oracle prod host. And what will happen here is we'll grab any incremental changes since the last build process, pull those into Actifio, and we're actually going to go through and mark and label that with the build number that we're running right now for Jenkins, as well as the Git URL so that I can track which project I'm working on. So this will all be kept and tracked from within Actifio. We'll be able to identify that point in time as the starting point for this particular build. And once that process is completed, we're actually going to go through and do a cleanup to remove any existing databases from the last build process that we ran through. And once we have a clean Oracle system, we're going to go through and then provision that same database that we just grabbed from the source and present a virtual copy of that over to my test environment over here that's being used by the web application. So Jenkins will run through and automate these three steps that we have to provision that latest and greatest refreshed test data set. And as the last piece for us to run through here, we're actually going to deploy that WAR file, so my finally compiled and built web application, over to a running Tomcat server. So I have a context path set here where the app will be deployed in. It's going to be put into a /Actifio directory. And I've already authenticated Jenkins with its own username and password back on the Tomcat system that'll allow me to run a script to deploy it. And then again, this is the host for my Tomcat server itself, where we'll be deploying that web app. So let's go back to the dashboard real quick. We're going to take a peek at how things are sitting right now with my my previous build that I've run. The Tomcat server I have, I'm going to log into that real quick here. And we'll take a look at the manager view. You can see I have a running instance right now of that Actifio web application. Now I'm also going to jump over to my Oracle server. And you can see I have a mounted instance over here from the last build process with my Oracle database. So this is actually Actifio presenting over to us a virtual database copy and bring that online. So let's make a quick change to the GitHub project and then we'll kick off a build process. So right here I have a view into one of my greeter classes that I have created, and we'll just make a really simple change here. I'm going to remove a comment that I have at the top of this. We'll commit the changes and then we'll kick off the build process from within Jenkins. So I've gone through and I've hit build just to drive a ad hoc build process on demand. And you can see here that Jenkins actually reached back out to GitHub and it found out the change that I just committed. I removed that comment. And let's take a look at the console output where we'll see it running through that automated build process. So it already found the POM file and began the Maven build. It's gone through, started my testing already. And it's actually at the point now where we're provisioning over that test data set using Actifio. So the first thing that we've gone ahead to do is call an API call back over to my Actifio system, requesting that we refresh our virtual copy using the latest and greatest data from our source system. So right now it's grabbing that refresh, whatever those incremental changes might be since the last build process, pulling them into the Actifio version, and then it's also tagging it with that build number and my Git URL to be able to track where we're running through on the build process for that particular image from within Actifio. So you can see that Actifio went through and finished grabbing all the incremental changes it needed to refresh the database that it's now managing. And our next part over here is going through and completing the cleanup process on the Oracle server where we're unmounting that previous copy that we had there. Okay, so the cleanup job succeeded. Let's take a quick look over here and just make sure everything was unmounted. You can see that Jenkins went through and used that API call to actually pull away the database. And now what we're doing is representing over that refreshed image. Okay, great. Now we can see that that database has been presented back over to my Oracle server. You can actually also see that quickly after that we went through and deployed the WAR file to get the web application running on top of my Tomcat server. So just to check these out real quick, you can see we now have a new mount point here where Actifio has gone through and given us a copy of that latest and greatest Oracle database. And the last piece to check is to make sure that my web application is up and running. So looking at the status in the Tomcat server, I've got my Actifio web application up and running. And let's actually log over just to confirm that. Perfect. So the web app is now up, speaking back over to my Oracle database, and my entire build process has been completed by Jenkins. I'm going to go back to the project real quick, and we'll just take a look at that history. So here's my job that I just ran, my build 18. We've gone through to do that configuration. Now we'll take a peek real quick over at the Actifio UI, and you'll see how we flagged that copy of the Oracle database to line up with this build process. And you can see my latest copy that I've gone through and grabbed for my small DB on my Oracle server. It's now flagged over at that label for my build process within Jenkins. So we're now ready to begin the integration testing or any other testing that we want to do with this environment we just stood up. And we're ready for us to go through and repeat the build process next time. Thank you for taking a look at this demo of Actifio with Jenkins.